between Catholic and Orthodox. So what do you think? Can you give me some resources for like to learn more about how the Catholic Church works? Because like I tried googling it and I just got like a basic like chat GBT answer and it didn't really tell me. So can you tell me some things about the Catholic Church and how it's different from Orthodox and
Okay, sure. I have some resources prepared just for you. Okay,
thanks.
so here's three videos. There's a part four as well.
Okay.
And here's the down and dirty, what the difference is between papal primacy and papal infallibility.
Okay.
Bismo, can you explain the difference between like a material heretic, or like the virtual difference between a material heretic and a formal heretic?
Yeah, so a material heretic is someone who holds an erroneous position, but they're not fully culpable, meaning like they don't know that they're either wrong on it or they're lacking information. Okay, and this is
Mm.
according to Saint Thomas's distinction. Whereas for Saint Tom, whereas for uh, formal heresy, it's an erroneous uh, teaching, like a teaching in error that they know to be in error. So, how would you establish that they know it? Well, if, for example, the orthodox teaching already exists, and there's no reason that we wouldn't know that they weren't aware of what the orthodox teaching was, and they continue to teach a heretical version of it. That's manifest heresy.
Mm.
So that's precisely what happens at the Third Council of Constantinople. Is it anathematizes not just Pope Honorius, but it also anathematizes the Patriarch of Constantinople, Antioch, and of Alexandria. All four of those patriarchs, they get anathematized. Though literally the first line of the whole document, it announces that the prior infallible teachings were enough and sufficient.
I've also heard like that the once you become like a priest, like your soul kind of changes.
Correct.
Is there anything to like that point, like where you should kind of know better as a result of that?
Pretty much. So that's what I also cover in this video, right? So when Princess challenges, right, and she says, you can't keep calling the Pope a formal heretic and blah, blah, blah. So then I ask her, okay, well, do you believe that a priest is ontologically different from a layperson? And she's like, no. He's the same thing as another, he's still a man, right? And I'm like, yeah, he's still a man, but do you believe that he changes into a different type of a man? And she's like, no, that's not the Catholic position.
Yeah, she's not Catholic.
Now you get it. That's why the church warns us not to anathematize people or to call them schismatics or heretics because what if you're wrong, right? If you're wrong on a core doctrine and you accuse someone else of getting it wrong without recognizing that you're wrong, that automatically makes you not a Catholic. So it cautions us not to do this, right, without church authority. So like the thing is for me, like for all intents and purposes, like if you have a pope that says all paths or all religions are a way to God, that statement is just intellectually dishonest and it contradicts the Bible. before you
And
try
that,
to
yeah,
rationalize, well, the Pope said other things in other contexts, like, oh, he told Christians, right, at the Christian meeting that Jesus is the only way, stick with Jesus. You know what I mean? But he's going to tell people in Singapore who aren't Christian that all paths are a way to God. So he's being inconsistent, right? We wouldn't say that just because he told Christians one thing and he told non-Christians another thing that he's saying the same thing to both, right?
yeah. I think it's not only would it be wrong or like a heresy in that way, but it's also very, yeah, like imagine you're dooming, like your words have so much weight that you're effectively doing a lot more damage as a result of giving people like bad information, right?
Yeah, so if you look at Hosea 4, why is the Bible thing not working?
The Bible bot.
Yeah, it's not working.
It's been broken for a couple hours.
Virgin, fix it.
Uh,
That's literally what God says. So the whole point of like ontological change, right? And in that video, like I'm literally explaining to Princess, in the Catholic Church, we do believe that once a candidate for priesthood is ordained as a priest, they are no longer ontologically the same type of person. They're not the same as every other man. They they become a priest. A priest is not the same thing as a man, right? But a man could become a priest. Just like the priest and the poet, a poet is not a priest, but a priest can be a poet. Does this make
Yeah,
sense? Like,
yeah, no,
so part of the ontological character of some, or part of the ontological essence of someone who becomes a priest is that they are no longer a private person. That's part of their ontological change in essence. They are no longer a representative of just themselves and their private belief. They are forever a representative of Christ and his church. They belong to the church. So that's how priests in particular in a special way not only have certain rights and privileges according to the law of the church, also known as canon law, they are also held accountable to the law of the church and canon law.
yeah,
So in canon law, so that begs the question. So in canon law, there is a distinction that's made between internal and external forum. The internal forum includes things like private confession or communication and theological speculation, deliberation between those of the clerical state. Okay?
yeah.
So, but once it involves any sort of manifestation, once you're in public with people who are not just clerics, or you're not just by yourself, you can be held accountable by the tribunal of the church for anything you do. So if you're a priest that's hanging out at strip clubs and stuff, you technically speaking, you could have a trial be held against you, and you could be reprimanded for that and disciplined by the church.
Is the Pope kind of like above this,
So
like institutionally?
in canon law, yes. Institutionally speaking, yes. No one can judge the Pope.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah, because he's the final appellate jurisdiction.
That's insane.
So the thing is de facto, obviously, you see priests doing a lot of weird stuff, and you've always seen that way in the history of the Catholic Church, right?
Yeah.
That's why when Dante writes his Divine Comedy, like some of like those people that he depicts that are in hell are like literally priests and bishops.
Because
And
they should know better.
yep, now you get it. If you look at Hosea 4, that's literally what God says. Because you rejected, right, the things that you should have known, I'm also going to reject you as being my priests.
Do the Can the priests ever get their position back? Like, let's say a priest, goes to a strip club and he's like drinking, like he fucking loses his mind, and he's like a huge. He goes on some type of like binger,
Bender.
yeah, bender,
Yeah.
and then he like, I guess he goes back to normal mental. And he's like, holy, what the hell, like, what
Yeah.
happened?
So I'll give you the example, the most contemporary example. It's literally the sex abuse crisis. That's why the bishops covered it up. It was a systematic cover up. And I'll tell you how this looks like from the church's end, okay? So, you know how like I said, I began with the priest is ontologically different. He's no longer a personal representative of himself. He now represents the church, right?
Yeah,
So, because of that, I said he had certain rights and privileges, right? And additionally, he could be held accountable by the church law. So, there are certain privileges that he has because he is a public representative of the church. Um, that including, and because he has rights and privileges in virtue of the church law itself. When you look at canon law, what it says is because he is no longer a public person, right? He doesn't belong to the civil authority, and the church is claiming ownership of him, of the priest, quote unquote.
yeah,
The bishop, like if you look at the canon law, it says the bishop, part of the rights that any ordained cleric enjoys is that within his jurisdiction, because you're not going to have a priest that doesn't have an ordinary, it's hierarchical, right? Um, the ordinary is the priest's advocate and protector. So it's like that's part of like what doesn't get articulated as much. But it's like, let's say you're my priest, okay, and I'm your bishop, and you start diddling with kids, right?
yeah,
According to church law, because in the Catholic Church we believe that church law is higher than civil law, okay? They're not equal. And if you have certain rights and privileges that are denoted by the canon law itself, and it says that I have to be your legal advocate and jurisdictional like protector, right? Even against the civil law, then I'm not like I can't treat you like I'm not treating you're not my employee. Does that make
yeah,
sense? So because when they come at you and try to press charges against you, they're going to have to come through me first and
okay,
my office. Because you're only a priest according to church law, you only have jurisdiction as a priest in virtue of me as your primary pastor and ordinary, right?
yeah.
So if I have information that can incriminate you, I would be violating canon church law if I gave you up or gave the civil authority any information on you. That's what's happening.
Mm.
So when Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI during John Paul II with his approval, wrote that all matters of clergy sex abuse are to be held into the internal forum, that's what he was that's what he was reinforcing. That the church law is higher than the civil law and the bishops have to protect and shield their priests.
Did
I
the
don't know if
Protestants
that
have
answers
anything
your
like this?
no. Because for Protestants every pastor is incorporated. like
Like
as
they're
a
their
private
own
entity.
entity?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Damn, Grudgin, you hear that?
Bah.
Now,
Joel Olstein.
I personally have real major issues with this, so I do agree that church law is above um
Like civil law?
this. Yeah, I do. But I believe that the church, if that's the case, and you have a case that a priest is accused both by civil authority and by a church person or even a non-church person of sexual abuse of a minor, the church should have done their own internal investigation, held a tribunal for the church, and once that tribunal was held by the church authority and church law, and if it was found that the priest was in fact guilty and culpable, then you release him to the civil authority. But that never happened. You get what I'm saying?
Do you think they protect each other because it's like a you scratch my back, I scratch yours, like
Yes.
favor?
And I think a lot of the bishops were gay. And I think a lot of the priests in the diocese were also gay. And because of Vatican II and this overemphasis on synodality, most bishops didn't they still don't have they didn't before in the past, and they still don't have a lot of power to challenge the homosexual lobby of clerics within their own dioceses. For example, that's how it was for Cardinal George of um, Chicago before he died. Like there's a huge population of homosexual priests in that diocese, but there's nothing he could do to like you know fight against them or lobby against them, right? Because he relies on them for the ministry and the administration of the church. There's only so much a bishop can do when basically the majority of all your priests are gay. Like I think the public don't realize that. I'm sure that they do it would make sense to people like more generally speaking that, oh yeah, yeah, I guess there's like a lot of gay people in the priesthood. That makes sense. They're not like getting married, right? Like who would who would take a vow of celibacy? You know what I mean? And you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Um, but for Catholics, like I don't think they understand that. Like I think they're less aware that, dude, when you have like a gay club basically within the Catholic Church, I mean, we only know about gay culture now because it's like more out in the open for the past 20, 30 years. You see,
Yeah.
they're pretty vindictive and they're pretty exclusive. Like gay guys are some of like the harshest like critics, and they're very superficial and materialistic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they shit on guys all the time for not looking good or taking care of themselves or being hot.
Yeah.
So now think, if you're in a system, an institution where the majority of the people that are running
Up
the
in the
thing,
hierarchy,
now
yeah.
you get it.
Like they're all gay, like
They're all
they're
gay.
they're they would have like the gay culture would have manifested itself and emerged through like these weird institutional reforms, or like not reforms but like things like Vatican II or whatever.
Yep, that's precisely what happened.
So like the institution, like the church kind of got co-opted over time, but it still is functional, right? Like it can still do its like main job of like Grudgin. What do you think about all this?
I agree with Abysmal. It seems logical.
Let's say I was a bishop in the 50s and 60s, and obviously, like being homosexual was much more taboo. And you get a gay guy who really wants to be a priest. Like I'm supposed to be his pastor, right? And then he's confessing to me. He's like, Bishop, I'm like really gay. I don't know what to do with my urges, but I want to serve the Lord and I'm trying my best, and I'm like completely devoted and all that stuff. I'm supposed to be
Yeah,
his pastor, you know what I mean? And he's already ordained as my priest. All I can do is pray for him and try to encourage him and all that stuff. But guess what happens? he continues to do that shit and he starts diddling kids. And then we find out about it, and then he's come back and he's still sorry. He's like, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm working on my life. I don't know why I'm doing this. I was abused when I was a child, and blah, 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 but I still want to serve the Lord, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, we're going to send you for some psychological evaluation, help you out there, and then we'll reinstate you. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Should they have fucking done that?
No, dude.
Now you get it. That's where they didn't hold the tribunal within the church. And that's what I'm trying to say is that even though like I can tell you these things that okay, yeah, it's an ontological change and they should be held accountable by the tribunal, that process didn't happen. So like it was a systematic cover up.
Yeah.
And they've been deluding themselves, especially the bishops, even up to the Pope, even John Paul II. He just wanted to put it under the rug. He thought he was just going to be the pastor for the world or some bullshit. It was just neglect. They should have held the tribunals and they should have gotten rid of all. They should just fucking laicize them and then hand over all the records to the cops, to the civil authority.
You know
That,
what?
yeah, go ahead.
Putting all of this into perspective, it seems like there's two batch of traitors. It's like the gay priests and like these like institutional figureheads that are like destroying the church for their own like little you know agendas or whatever. And then like the other batch of traders are like the people who aren't in like the top of the hierarchy, like the normal people, but they're like simping for it being like, oh, you can't criticize them, who are you to judge? Like it's like you're allowing them by protecting them in this weird way, like you're allowing them to get away with it.
Yep. So, like, a lot of the criticism that, like, people from Pope Francis's generation have, and the reason why they hate tradition so much, is because when they were growing up, before Vatican II, that's literally how the church operated. It was very strict on its priests. That's why priests were like trying to maintain their holiness and it was very strict and quote unquote rigid because what we call the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, like we use this new way of like talking about it and recategorizing it. Um, but at the time, that was the dogmatic institution of the church. That's what it was called. And in earlier times, it was known as the Inquisition.
Oh yeah.
Now you get it.
Damn.
And we all know what the Inquisitions did, right? It wasn't just Inquisition, that was the tribunal, right? Like, you know how in the military you have like JAG officers?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's a self-policing mechanism. So, back when they were okay, so during the Protestant Revolution, obviously like, they got a bad rap because they were the church tribunal not only were a lot of the tribunals that they were holding were for Catholic priests and Catholic bishops who were holding Protestant positions. So they burned them at the stake as heretics.
As a
But even
base.
yeah, but even before this, like even before the Protestant Reformation, that's what the church was doing. You look at the Spanish Inquisition, that's what it was doing. There was a lot of syncretism happening between the Muslims and the Christians on this in the Iberian Peninsula. So they called the Spanish Inquisition and they got rid of all those heretics. They held the tribunals, found them as heresies or, heretics. They weren't orthodox, basically. And they either laicized them or they drove them out of the church. But by the time we get to Vatican II, they were like trying to change the church's image and modernize and came up with this new theology. You get what I mean? And
Yeah.
they're working under the right, and they got rid of all of that way of of approaching it. Did that mean that magically all of a sudden like the fallen nature of man just disappears? No. We're the same fucking disgusting shit. And guess what happens when you completely decide to just turn the other cheek, so to speak, or turn the other eye away, right? Even
Yeah.
worse shit came out of it.
So it's
Yeah.
almost like as a result of people burying their head in the sand,
Yep.
that things like got progressively worse.
Yeah.
Like they were neglecting their responsibility to keep an eye on like their hierarchy and like the way it was kind of operating.
Once I mentioned the Inquisition, it, I'm not trying to make you make excuses for the Inquisition because there was a lot of bad stuff that happened back then too. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, but I'm not going to press you on, how you feel about whether or not we should be using those mechanisms, but you can kind of see the rationale of why the church would have taken it so seriously back then, right?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't really know a whole lot about the Inquisition history. I just know like they'd go around killing heretics. That was about it.
Right. And it wasn't just the pagans. It was its own priests that it was holding tribunals for and accusing and prosecuting.
It kind of operated as like a like an immune response.
Yeah. Like it was I mean, yeah, you could say that. Like the white blood cells in the body, right?
Yeah,
Um no one was that's the church, the Inquisition, the church tribunal treated everybody equally. Like it didn't matter if you were a cardinal or if you were even a bishop. Obviously there is some politics involved, and ultimately like the Pope decide not to take certain cases if he doesn't want to. You know what I mean?
yeah,
All that kind of politics is always part of it. But technically speaking, like you could have monks tattle on their headmaster and be like, "Yo, our they can literally go to the Vatican, to the Inquisition itself, and be like, we have record of our abbot teaching this stuff." Or the priest could go to the tribunal and be like, well, my bishop has been telling me to do this, and I don't feel like this is orthodox. And the Vatican itself, the Pope himself, would look into it and then discipline the bishop. That's what was going on literally during the Protestant Reformation. Because the church has neglected to deal with that, guess who's dealing with it now? The fucking lay people, and we don't have any authority to deal with it, right? So you have all these freaking heresies running around, people leaving the Catholic Church because, at this point in their life, they didn't agree with this church teaching. You know what I mean? They left the church and, oh, and then I saw the light again once I learned more about church history and what my real faith was about. And then I came back to the Catholic Church and blah, 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 blah. There's really no
yeah,
guidance there that's really happening. It's not like the current priests are really teaching anybody anything. They're just off going off on weekends to their gay Jesuit country clubs on like the weekends or on their sabbaticals like every year, and they're just like they don't give a fuck.
Fuck the
Um,
fuck the law.
so I know we watched a little bit of Malachi Martin yesterday, right?
I think I went to bed after we watched like the near death experience stuff, and I think you guys. I don't know. I don't remember. I
Were you-
went to sleep like at
Oh
around 3. I
shit, you weren't
think.
here for that, huh? Okay.